For us, the challenge is good education, reliably, for all of our students. Today, a rapidly increasing number of new ideas are being thrown out at our education system at a pace that I've just never seen before. Often these good ideas come without the practical knowledge as to how to actually execute on them, and often without the capacity in terms of people and institutions to actually take a good idea and turn it into something that can actually work over and over again for lots of different subgroups of students, working with varied teachers and in sometimes quite differentiated organizational conditions, schools and communities. When you think about this blizzard of ideas, it has the makings of what I sometimes refer to as a reform migraine. It's no wonder so many educators today feel like they're suffering from initiative fatigue. I just simply can't take all of this in and figure out what to do with it. The truth is that our schools are gradually getting better. I have good data for that, at least in the US context. The problem is that our aspirations for what we want our schools to accomplish are increasing at a much faster rate. And this has been going on for some time. When I first spoke with the board of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in late 2007, during the search process that eventually brought me there, this was the problem I talked to them about. This was the reality we were in. This chasm had been growing for some time, and the chasm, of course, is greatest for our most disadvantaged students and in our most disadvantaged communities. It seemed inconceivable to me that we could close this chasm unless we had a much more vital research and development infrastructure that was specifically organized on solving this problem. That's become the mission of the Carnegie Foundation. Truth is, in our field, we have a learning problem. We have a lot of people working very hard, students, faculty, administrators, leaders of school districts, and state educators. Yet we can't seem to connect really hard work and really good intentions and even really good ideas with widespread improvement. We need to get better at getting better. One thing seemed really clear to us as we began this mission, on this mission at the Carnegie Foundation. We cannot solve these problems by continuing to act as we always have. So we've scoured both nationally and internationally across different sectors and industries for practices that might help us think and act better about this problem. What might we learn from each of these that might help us a bit in thinking about the problem that confronts us now as we're trying to close that chasm and be able to have quality outcomes occurring reliably for all of our students. Culling the best of what we've learned from these kind of deep studies of other sectors, together with some 20 years of working on school improvement directly in the Chicago public schools, we advanced something we call an improvement paradigm that's anchored around 6 principles. And let me quickly introduce those 6 principles to you. First is to be problem-focused and user-centered. The second is to see variability in performance. To understand that variability in performance, you have to see the system that's producing it. If we want to get better at getting better, we have to embrace measurement and disciplined inquiry as the way we're going to learn. And we can accelerate that learning if we carry it out in structured networks that are akin to what you might call practical scientific communities. And now what I want to do is take you through each of these 6 principles and talk a little bit about each one. The first principle. Improvement science, that's what this discipline is called in healthcare and a few other places now, starts with a deceptively simple question. What is the specific problem or problems you're trying to solve. And the key word here is specific. We generally know what kind of outcomes we want to see more of, but we tend not to know what changes we would actually have to introduce to affect more of those outcomes. All right, the second principle. If we want quality outcomes to occur reliably for all students and in the many different contexts in which education occurs, then variability in performance is the problem to solve. Education is complex work. The tasks we ask teachers to take on today are much more complex than back when I was in school. The work of teaching from a task perspective has gotten more complex. And accompanying this, the organizations in which teachers work have also gotten more complex in a variety of different ways. So whenever, I'm speaking now as an organizational sociologist, whenever you find task and organizational complexity, you'll find wide variability in outcomes. Addressing this requires moving beyond knowing that something could work someplace for some students, which might have the effect of moving that curve a smidgen to the right. We need much more than that. We need to know how to achieve quality outcomes reliably for different subgroups of students and teachers working under different and varied organizational, school, and community contexts. What works for whom, under what set of conditions? These are the kinds of questions we need to be able to think about and address if we're ever to get to the point where we not only shift that distribution dramatically to the right, but most importantly, we also cut that left-hand tail of the distribution. Only by focusing explicitly on this can we move from that wide, unacceptable variability we currently see to a future where many more students are succeeding and long-standing disparities in student outcomes. In order to do this, in order to address that variability in performance, we need to understand and see the system that's producing it. What's actually producing the outcomes we observe? That's our third principle, see the system. We need to focus in on the work that people do in our schools and our school systems and why they do it as they do. It's only in this kind of deep understanding about these work systems that we can begin to see problems that otherwise are often, well, in one sense, they might be right in front of us, but in another sense, they remain obscured from our sight because they don't provide the impetus for improvement. So, put simply, improvement means thinking about how organizations actually work. It means seeing how various people and processes and the norms that shape their behavior, and beneath that, the beliefs they hold, how these all come together to produce the outcomes we get. Because we're pretty good in education of throwing, Atul Gawande has an expression about this in healthcare, creating more parts. So, well, we're going to have new lessons, or we're going to commit to professional development, or we're going to create a social support center for students someplace over here. We work on the parts, but we typically don't work on making all of this come together to actually achieve the outcomes we seek. So having great parts, but not attending to the system that brings how to bring these parts all together to advance quality outcomes for every single person who walks through the door. That's the problem, kind of problem we tend to under-attend to. Moving on to the fourth principle, embrace measurement. Achieving improvement means constantly challenging ourselves. Here, we're actually part of the problem. There's a very natural human tendency to see what you believe. Psychologists refer to this as confirmation bias. Because this is part of just our human nature, it's especially important that we embrace measurement. We need data to test whether these great ideas we have, are they actually working? We need data to kind of push back at us, to cause us to stop and maybe think and puzzle a bit. Well, what else might be going on here that I just simply haven't been thinking enough about? So, this focus on measurement. However, it's measurement of a different sort than we tend to think about. We have a lot of student outcome data now. We've built longitudinal data systems. We have incredible tools for slicing and dicing these data on student outcomes. So we know much more about this, including disparities in student outcomes than ever before. But to guide improvement, our measurement system needs to get down into the actual work processes, the roles people enact. Again, those prevailing norms and beliefs that shape how work actually plays out. Because this is where the outcomes we're concerned about actually take root. So there's a very simple idea in here. To guide improvement, measurement needs to focus down on the actual work processes that people enact and why these things are happening. The fifth principle, engaging disciplined inquiry. This is what allows us to learn faster, one of the mechanisms that allows us to learn faster to achieve the outcomes we seek. Now, to make the right changes requires being very deliberate about how we work our way through this. Learning from failure turns out to be essential to ultimately achieve the quality outcomes you seek. This is just a very basic principle that you see over and over again. We actually learn more when we expect something to happen, it doesn't happen, and it causes us then to scratch our heads and sort of creates kind of a cognitive dissonance. Well, I really expected X, Y happened, and then why did Y happen? That's where the learning for improvement is actually beginning to take root. Okay, so given that learning from failure is really key to this, this has two big implications. The first of which is, well, no matter how good that idea is you think you have, there's some chance it won't work. There's the idea, and then there's actually knowing how to execute on the idea. So this says we ought to really start small, put the principle on learning fast, minimize costs in the sense that this thing doesn't work and it might actually harm somebody. So all of this says place the principle on learning fast to ultimately implement well, which is the exact opposite of what we tend to do, which is implement fast and learn accidentally. That's how we tend to operate as a field. So this is put the premium on learning fast so that we can actually get smarter to get to the quality outcomes more reliably we seek. So that's this idea of starting small. But it also has a second implication. It means we're also very thoughtful and deliberate about how we think moving out to larger scale should proceed. We need to accelerate learning here too. Just because somebody or a small group of people managed to get something to work in some small set of situations doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. In fact, you should expect it won't. And that's the deliberate part of this. As it starts to move out from looking productive in a few places, you want to take it out to places that are quite different from the places you started, and you actually want it to break. Break, I mean, in the sense that it actually doesn't work there the way you expected, because that's teaching us something about the limits of these change ideas that we've been working on. It's only in this way, by making manifest this variability in performance, that we can make the changes even better over time as these improvement initiatives move to greater scale. The sixth and final principle, organizing as networks. The education system that we've built and the problems embedded within them now are so complex that very few can solve them on their own. We need coordinated collective action involving a range of experts, faculty, administrators, researchers, technologists, designers, systems thinkers, and so on. This means we need to break down the silos that characterize the lives in which we work if we're to better engage with one another on this improvement journey. We call these intentionally designed collaborations networked improvement communities, or NICs for short. Each NIC is organized around a specific problem to be solved, like those high failure rates in developmental math classes. A shared working theory of improvement that's anchored in seeing the system, and part of our seeing the system was that those issues around losing students, for example, in the first couple of weeks. Using common measures so that we can gather data from every place in which this work is going on, and common inquiry tools so that participants in the network can learn what changes seem to be working for whom under what set of conditions, and gradually move the collective enterprise toward better outcomes more broadly. And the NIC is very deliberate in accumulating this practical knowledge, making it quickly accessible to others for further testing, and if it really seems to work across a lot of places, putting it into something that we refer to as the kernel. If you're just starting with this, here's an ensemble of resources to scaffold your work. Invariably, you're probably going to adapt this some in your context, but know that what's in this kernel represents the best collective knowledge of many others working on this same problem. So you can stand on their shoulders rather than beginning as if we know nothing, which is often how much educational change occurs. We act in a way which is basically one that's very supportive of individual learning. Individual educators are constantly experimenting every day in their classrooms. They learn things through that, but unfortunately as a field, what they learn tends to live and die with the individuals who learned it. We don't have a way of accumulating this practical knowledge so that those who come after us can actually build on what we've learned. This, by the way, is actually the workings of a scientific community. This is how scientific communities work. But now, one's dedicated to practical educational problem solving. Embedded here is extraordinary potential for improvement in education, because education is the quintessential large network. We have hundreds of thousands of people doing very similar work every day. This means that for virtually any question that I might ask about my own practice, chances are there's someone out here, maybe right in this room right now, who's actually been thinking about this, working on this for some period of time, and has actually learned something that I could build on, except I don't know who you are and I don't know what you learned. But we could, if we were much more deliberate about structuring our efforts as networked improvement communities. This means pushing aside old norms for those of us in the academy about my personal research interest, and it also means pushing at norms about the uniqueness of every classroom, which means I have to invent it all myself if we truly were to believe that. It means breaking down the silos around teaching that separate faculty from one another. And it means challenging the long-standing traditional research practice divide. We are all improvers now, joined together in building knowledge about improving teaching and learning. This improvement paradigm that I've been talking about is different. It joins together this discipline of improvement science with the power of structured networks to accelerate learning to improve. Often we get feedback from people. This sort of sounds a little bit like what we're already doing. But there's focus on disciplined inquiry and structured networks who are actually working together to solve a common problem. That is not characteristic of how we work as a field. It values analytic and systematic ways necessary to develop and test changes, so it's kind of a scientific method, if you will. It's inclusive in drawing together practitioners, researchers, designers, as I've said, and many others. And it's very deliberate in organizing its improvement activities in ways of a scientific community. Now, we can talk about strategies and methods and data for very long periods of time, but in the end, improving what happens in our schools and colleges and universities, it's all about the people. This work needs the active, full engagement of educators. This is different than what we've been doing. You're no longer the passive recipients of someone else's ideas, waiting for them to be kind of passed down from above for you to implement. You are improvers. You're where it happens, because you are where teachers meet students around subject matter. You are actually where the work happens. Making space in educators' workload for doing this kind of work won't be easy, because time is the most constrained resource in education. But we need educators engaged in this work. We need researchers to join with them as well. We need their theory-based insights, their methodological skills, and our passion for using this expertise to advance the public good. These ideas also speak to policy leaders. We need them to enable capabilities in schools and our educational institutions to engage in this kind of systematic improvement work. There are tools and methods that need to be learned, and it is a form of a professional practice, which one only develops expertise in, learning by doing, in collaboration with others, and hopefully at least some in that group may be a little bit more expert on parts of this work than I happen to be. That's how we develop expertise in a professional practice. So we need policy leaders to be able to make that happen. And it will take supportive environments for this work. These have to be places where educators are safe to fail, to talk about their failures, to learn from that, and try to figure out what to do next. When any of us feel seriously threatened and vulnerable, it's just very hard to learn. This, too, is a very deep, well-established organizational principle. When you're really asking people to change the way they work, and in some cases to change the way they think about how they do their work, this is very hard to accomplish in an environment where people don't feel safe. We could imagine together a future in which the kinds of systematic learning to improve that I've been trying to talk a little bit about today is occurring every day in thousands of settings and engaging tens of thousands of educators, scholars, engineers, many others, designers. The education field could become an immense networked improvement community. And if we were, this would greatly accelerate how we learn to improve. We could achieve valued outcomes that we now aspire to, that may make for very persuasive rhetoric, but realistically have no strategy to accomplish. Whether it's all children reading by grade 3, all children career and college ready by the end of high school, all students achieving some valued certification as they move out into their adult lives and the world of work. It will take different kinds of thinking and learning and ways of working together to get all of this to happen, and to happen faster and better. This is the challenge and the opportunity in which it would be wonderful for us to engage together. This is taking on the journey together of learning to improve. In closing, I'm grateful for the opportunity this evening to be able to share some of these ideas with you. If you're enticed by them and would like to learn more, I refer you to the book that Ruth mentioned earlier. And for those of you who might want to engage with a growing improvement community, I invite you to consider joining us, joining the community in the Improvement Summit that we'll be hosting next spring in San Francisco. Thank you.